What dark facts do you know about the food industry? Story 1. I worked as kitchen staff in a high-end restaurant. On a slow summer Sunday afternoon, the boss sent us down to the walk-in meat coolers to spray paint the rusted walls. We were instructed to not remove the contents of the cooler first. Rather, just shift the meat from one side of the cooler to the other. The coat of silver spray paint will come off during cooking. Story 2. In my country, buffets often sell spoiled food. Like if the employees see mold on top of the sour cream, they just scrape it down and continue selling it. Also, if they sell cooked meat, they often leave them on the counter for days, and just add some oil to it every morning to make it look fresh. Story 3. As a former cook, I've thought about just ordering some things from Cisco, trading with friends, and getting a big chest freezer. One place I worked had farm-to-table key lime pies, which were frozen Cisco pies with a few blueberries and strawberries and a few dabs of whipped cream put on top. The fresh fish tacos were frozen, pre-battered Cisco products as well. Don't get me wrong, both of these were delicious, but at $8 a slice and $20 a meal, I would rather just buy a big box, or even start a collective of sorts. How is this not false advertising, or even fraud at the worst? Another dark side of the food industry. My restaurant says we're a from-scratch kitchen and recycle corks, crayons, and menus. We don't recycle, and our mashed potatoes are boiled in the plastic bag we get them in. Story 4. The amount of waste thrown away every single day by grocery stores. I worked in the meat department of a decently sized grocery store, and their waste was nauseating. I kid you not, we would throw away an industrial-sized garbage bag worth of meat, fish, and poultry every single day. The expiration dates dictated everything, which is absolutely a sensible policy to have, but they wouldn't do anything about it. They wouldn't donate it, let employees take it home, or make adjustments to the orders so we wouldn't have to throw so much away. The reasoning was always, better have too much than not enough, which I guess makes a little sense, but when I'm throwing away dozens of pounds of tenderloins, center-cut fish, and shellfish per night, it's too much. Mind you, this is one department of the grocery store, not all of them. Well, from my understanding, grocery store expiry dates are pretty stringent, which is why they can't just, give the food to someone because regulations dictate yada yada yada. And that makes a lot of sense, but, God, it's just a shame to see so much food go to waste, especially right now when things like meat are unaffordable for a lot of households. It'd be nice if they had, a one-day left section where they could sell meat for super cheap. But they might sell the meat in that last day before it expires, so why would you want to give it to someone for cheaper? Story 5. As a former chef, I've got to say that I have never seen any of the horrible stuff mentioned here over my career. Granted, I mostly worked in higher-end fine dining establishments. We on occasion would have things like frozen airline chicken breasts brought in, but other than that, we did all the prep and cooking by hand with fresh ingredients from mostly local purveyors when possible. We also broke down and deep cleaned every night, from the ranges to the floors to the wells to the vents. Every night. Myself and the staff have always taken this stuff very seriously, and it's always really disappointing when you hear of this kind of behavior. Do better, people. Story 6. Misleading labeling. No sugar, right? Wrong. If you read the ingredients, a lot of these packages will say things like maltodextrin and dextrose. That's actually sugar. But because of regulation, they only have to label it no sugar, and people think it's healthy. Tic Tacs are a lie. They set the serving size to 1, and because it's less than half a gram of sugar, they can legally say it's 0 calories and 0 grams of sugar. When in reality, Tic Tacs are something like 94.5% sugar, some crazy number like that. Story 7. Grocery distribution warehouses are often extremely filthy and rarely cleaned. Wash anything canned, bottled, or jarred at home. These places are filthy as hell, covered in microplastics, rotten food, mouse pee, bird crap, etc. I used to do maintenance on conveyor systems for a major US chain, and they just send things flying down the conveyors so fast that it's fairly common for glass to shatter because of the vibrations, food to fall off, and whatever else. I saw bats, birds, and mice in that facility, but it was with intolerance to their health policy. Also saw people that were sick, sneezing and coughing on products. Never saw a floor scrubber go through the warehouse the entire 3 months I worked there, and I was doing alternating double shifts. The only time I saw a broom was if there was shattered glass. Story 8. Chicken mills literally put male chickens on a conveyor belt that drops them into a grinder while they're still alive. It's gotta be a quick and painless death, but it's so barbaric it sticks with me. When I was 11 and getting interested in girls, there was a sock hop, and a lot of them were grinding on each other. I was like, dang, gotta see more of this. So I googled chicks grinding and sent it through Google. Watching instead, for the next hour, baby chicks being fed into an industrial grinder. Set back my sexual awakening for years. For those of you unsure of what a sock hop was, it's just basically a shoeless dance, hence the name. For those of you curious about the chicken grinding, real thing. Male chickens aren't good for eggs, and you don't really want a bunch of roosters roaming around, so they have to do that. I wouldn't suggest looking it up unless you're really curious. If you do, it's just like a routine procedure, so there's not some big theatrics around it. It's literally just watching a conveyor belt so full of chicks it's practically yellow instead of black, drop them off into a large paper shredder. It's not a pleasant sight. Story 9. Right out of college, I worked at a food testing lab. We did QC for veggies, cooked food, and meat, although we did mostly beef. Our two biggest customers were the nearby slaughterhouse, which was a pretty sizable one in the US, and one about 5 hours away in the next state over. The larger of the two was honestly decent as far as food quality went. They had issues here and there, but handled everything the way they were supposed to. Did everything by the book as far as food quality went, and even did more depending on what their customer asked. Two of their major customers were fast food restaurants that a lot of people eat at every day, both of which had higher quality food standards than what's at your grocery store. They still got cheaper beef, but they were much pickier about what they would accept as servable. Workers' conditions, though, that was a different story. I witnessed several walkouts and a mass no-call, no-show. Much of their workforce was placed there by immigration, as they were largely refugees. As an aside, the city was built around that slaughterhouse, and its history and diversity is really rich because of its immigrants. You can tell what generation a lot of families are there by their stories about the slaughterhouse and the income levels now. Like in the 80s, there were a lot of Vietnamese refugees at the slaughterhouse. Now, a lot of the Vietnamese population still there is upper middle class business owners. Same with the first wave Mexican families from the 50s, and so on. I'm not saying the slaughterhouse was good, though. By and large, it was a terrible place for workers. It was just a place where mom and dad busted their butts, and their kids ended up much better off and started their own businesses, or moved beyond being mass production butchers. The smaller slaughterhouse in the next state over, though, they prided themselves on being open-range beef, organic beef. I can never prove it, though, and I do have a lot of circumstantial evidence that they bleached their samples to get negative test results. But part of the QC process is you need to forcibly rot the meat to make it grow whatever's in it. That way you can make sure whatever makes it rot isn't really that bad, like E. coli or salmonella for instance, and some other things out there as well. After you let the meat rot for 14 hours, it smells like rotten meat. Not this place though. After 14 hours in an incubator, it smelled like bleach. Story 10. I've been in hundreds of kitchens, and I can say that generally the super popular local favorite places to eat are disgusting. The buildings are falling apart, the food is outdated, the walls, ceilings, and floors are alive with all kinds of bugs and rodents. Hopefully this is just my area, and not widespread throughout the country. I'm a property manager, and some of our tenants are restaurants. I think this description is pretty universal. Restaurants run on thin margins, and they are not interested in spending money on building maintenance or pest control. I had a few accounts where they weren't making very much money, and I completely understood not being able to make repairs. In that case, I'd do small repairs for them when I could. They kept the restaurants clean, though. But I had an issue with the larger clients who were pulling in crazy profits and not spending a dime for repairs because it wouldn't help their bottom line. I will say, having worked at a major steakhouse, the overall conditions were pretty good. The kitchen was clean, the procedures were really good, but the maintenance could have been a little bit better, and they could have been a little stricter with the staff. Some people would walk in sick, and I was a bartender, they'd grab ice from my bucket, and they just pour it straight into their glass and touch the tip of their glass with my little ice scoop. And that was problematic because they dropped the ice scoop back into the bucket. I'm not trying to get 600 people sick because your common cold tainted glass now just touched my ice scoop, which then you drop back into my ice bin. And from my experience working there before, I just couldn't take the stress anymore of worrying that I was going to get a bunch of people sick, or if someone had a cold sore that day that I was going to infect a whole restaurant of people. In my experience, I was the only person there who actually cared about that. So clearly it's not a massive issue. And I mean, I still just get waters or drinks or whatever when I go to a restaurant, even the same restaurant that I worked at. But it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way that people can be so inconsiderate. Story 11. I worked in a restaurant for a day. They ran out of dishes, and they took a dish which just came to the kitchen from a customer. They didn't even clean it. They wiped it with a paper towel and served food on it to another customer. Story 12. I work in the food and dairy industries. If you could smell some of the places or see the amount of crap they're allowed to get away with, you'd never drink milk again. I'll never forget the smell when I traveled through to the north part of Texas. There were a bunch of cow farms and slaughterhouses. It was honestly one of the worst experiences of my life. That smell lasted for miles. Story 13. I worked in a pepperoni factory 20 plus years ago as an accountant. Found that the more MSP in the bill materials, the lower quality and cheaper the product. Looking at the stuff, it looked kind of like an old square crumbly eraser, if you remember those. So I asked what MSP was. It's mechanically separated pork. When I asked what that means, they told me that after all the good meat is cut off the pig, a power washer is used to blast off the remaining flesh from the carcass. That then is scooped up, dried out, and packaged as MSP. Enjoy your next cheap pepperoni pizza. Thank you, I think I very much will. Actually, that doesn't sound half bad. Using every part of the animal and using it as a processed product is very common, like in chicken nuggets. I'd prefer it that way rather than food being wasted. Exactly. People forget that sausages started as a way of preserving parts of the animal which weren't immediately appetizing. This I agree with. Some of the methods to make the food palatable, like the pink goop picture for chicken nuggets that I'm sure a lot of us have seen, is a little bit suspect, but you know what? In a world with a growing population, you do what you gotta do. And I've heard of some cases of people getting injured from things like hot coffee at fast food restaurants and causing a lawsuit over that. But one I've never heard is someone getting sick from chicken nuggets, so I'm on board with it. So that's it for today, guys. Don't forget to leave your story down below if you have one. I'd love to do a video on them in the future. My name is ReddList. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you next time.
What do you want with me?
I'm not here for you. I'm here to learn about a ship called the Delilah.
Did the Lord Regent send you? That old fool, Hiram